Welcome to The Chemical Show, the podcast where chemical means business. I'm your host, Victoria Meyer, bringing you stories and insights from leaders driving innovation and growth across the chemical industry. Each week, we explore key trends, real-world challenges, and the strategies that make an impact. Let's get started. Welcome back to The Chemical Show. Today, I am speaking with Mitch Toomey, who is the VP of Sustainability and Responsible Care at ACC, the American Chemistry Council. Mitch has a mix of public and private sector experience across a variety of roles in sustainability and strategy, including with the United Nations and with BASF before he joined ACC in 2022. Mitch and I are going to have a great conversation about the business case for sustainability, why sustainability still matters, and more. Mitch, welcome to The Chemical Show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. Let's start with your origin story. What got you interested in sustainability and ultimately into chemicals?
It's an interesting route, and I started in kind of management consulting and on the business side when looking at ways to eliminate waste and inefficiency in businesses. Really looking at it just from the bottom line perspective, as you normally would in a management consulting assignment. What I found was that the efficiencies gained by doing a more efficient way of doing business had dividends that were non-financial, and if a company would so choose, they could market their products by advertising some of these efficiencies that they gained, for example, using less water or producing less waste, almost as a kind of an add-on benefit to the kind of the better financial return on the product. And so that was a great kind of field of innovation, looking at ways to simply make businesses more efficient. When I saw that the United Nations was really taking a new stake at looking at their own operations and the efficiencies there, I found that to be like an incredibly exciting challenge. The idealism in me about maybe using this kind of opportunity and my skills to better how the world tackles these things was an appealing idea. I spent 15 years at the UN in different capacities, bringing that kind of mindset to the sustainability and the environmental aspects, and making sure that there was a grounding a bit in a business case for taking that forward. Because what we were determining at the UN at that time was, while this is a public sector kind of agreement, and the things that can happen with the kind of national agreements at the United Nations, the real work happens in the private sector. The real work happens in converting those aspirations into practicalities. And so I was very interested in how that, kind of transition from the aspiration to the reality works. Studied carefully which industries were most kind of integral to kind of managing these efficiencies, and the business of chemistry seemed so important to every industry. It really caught my attention, and I dove in full force. I did end up moving over to BASF, looking at taking their programs into North America, into a market-based system. Really exciting to learn the business. And I found my way here to ACC, looking at not only the deep kind of understanding of the chemical business, but this larger picture of how do we play our role in society? How do we bring folks together? How do we ensure that folks understand what we do and the value we bring to this conversation, and the efforts and the actions we're taking to make positive change?
That's great. I love that. In fact, a couple of things that stand out for me. Number one, you talk about efficiency, and I often say the chemical industry is inherently sustainable because we are always looking not necessarily for sustainability in its truest sense, but inherently it's been about efficiencies. How do we take that waste stream and turn it into something better? How do we have less emissions? Because emissions are both, bad from the environment, but also they're costly. So it's this whole aspect of building sustainability in because it makes good business sense and there's a good ROI, as opposed to it's just this targeted aspiration, right? So it's kind of just work its way into our DNA.
It's so hard to, in a market system, you can't push a button and have all the actors in your economy act in a certain way. We wouldn't want that. That's the joy of living in a kind of an open market as we do. However, the downside of that is you can't program in societal change as you might through an authoritarian kind of centrally government managed regime. But that's okay because it does happen. I think that the customers in this case are making their interests known. Businesses are adapting to appeal to these customers, just as we always have. I mean, let's remember this industry and our organization is over a century old, a century and a half, and we've seen a lot of societal change. And as we know in this country, we come up with amazing innovations to get us through challenges because we have this open invitation to join into the marketplace. And so I think that's really an important consideration, is that it's not just deciding that this is the direction we should go, but the incremental choices to satisfy customers along the way, and and to maintain a sustainable business, which is one that can indeed offer a return and can keep itself in business for the long term.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so important, and I think as you point out, innovation comes through creativity as opposed to having too many boundary conditions. I mean, you still have to have boundary conditions, but we probably wouldn't have some of the innovations we have today had we been following a really set path and structure that was required. So
I want to come back to something you just mentioned about the efficiencies of the industry, and maybe we'll get to it again. But we have data through our responsible care program that tracks the emissions of our members, that shows the emissions intensity has decreased 17% or so since 2017. We can get the specific number. Maybe Jenny has but this shows that regardless of the external forces and the societal demands, this has been an effort to eliminate waste and kind of watch the bottom line. And we've seen that intensity of waste decrease because it's more efficient and more profitable to have a lower waste system. Absolutely. And so I think that we are, optimally aligned with the society's interests here, because what's a safe and sustainable facility is a profitable facility.
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting with that data, the decline in emissions since 2017, we've grown as an industry. Right. Our output has grown. So our output has grown and our emissions have reduced, which is a win-win-win for everybody.
It's hard sometimes with these big challenges that always seem intractable to recognize the progress we've made. But I think it is important because so much work has gone into innovation and thinking of new ways to approach old problems. It never feels like it's enough, but I think we owe it to ourselves to reflect on the positives that have happened over the past. This has been an incredible period of innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Mitch, I know one of the things we're talking about today is around the business case for sustainability, but what really makes a sustainable business?
Well, great question. And this is probably true of anything within our industry or without. It's basically a sustainable business is a business that can operate, profitably, efficiently, safely, and survive for the long term. And so I think that regardless of the new kind of externalities and the new expectations of sustainability, I think it's important to remember that we've always had an issue of, is it a sustainable business? When I was in business school, you would be challenged to okay, if you're going to design a business, how can you make sure that it has its own internal profitability mechanism to stay in business and doesn't always require new capital? And so that's where we started, and I think that's a sustainable business. Now, it does, as I said, safely and efficiently. Well, this is where we bring in kind of society's interests in the sustainability of a business. But you do this by using your materials very efficiently, by scrutinizing your waste streams and anything that might be producing slack in your company. And so this is a perfect reminder of how important that is in running a business. Now, as we add on, kind of environmental responsibility and so on, it has to be seen through that very same frame. So you have to find a way to add those benefits on to the core factor of having a business that is able to stay in business, able to maintain the jobs, able to maintain its tax payments into society and so on. So that's the first and foremost role and responsibility of a business. And a sustainable business is one that can maintain itself.
Yeah, that's great. And in fact, there's so many companies across the chemical industry that have been in business for 75 years, 100 years, 100 plus years. That truly is the mark of sustainability. And you're doing it not just because of profitability, but it's also being a good corporate citizen, right? This whole aspect of license to operate, which ties in with a lot of things I know that ACC and its member companies work on in terms of safety and sustainability and emissions and responsible care, that it all becomes part and parcel of what becomes a sustainable business.
That's right. You reduce waste, you pay less for disposal. I mean, it's very clear that there's an economic return to these things. If you can do your resource management well, you avoid legal risks and regulatory, reputational risks, and so on. And so that's allowing you to kind of just maintain your role as a positive member of the economy. Let's get back to basics here a bit. This is a big changes take a long time. We want to make sure that we have responsible actors in the mix. And as you said, our members have, they've been in business for a long time, but I will tell you, they have changed what they've made over that time to respond to society's demands, and that's how they stay in business. And so you have to be ready for that. And we're seeing a very interesting set of new expectations and interests, but they only lay on top of a sustainable business model.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about sustainability priorities for ACC. And, obviously you've got a lot of experience, Mitch, in figuring this stuff out on a global stage and then here on a U.S. stage. But, when we look at it, what are the sustainability priorities for ACC? And then how do you align them, or how do they align with the industry and with your member company priorities?
Sure. Well, it's, I think our basic priorities are very human priorities. It's, clean water and air, high quality, looking at circularity and reducing waste, as we've just talked about, that, no one wants to, have a big wasteful system, whether it's at their household or in a company. And of course, looking at things like emissions of greenhouse gas, how can we reduce those to the degree we can. Now, those priorities are not just for our own facilities, but we feel we have kind of a role to play, as we have in society over time, to bring solutions to our customer industries so that they can further innovate. You look at the long stretch of history, we had a worry that we wouldn't have enough food to satisfy the human population. Well, amazing chemistry innovations came, and nitrogen fertilizers were invented, and suddenly we now can basically pull fertilizer from the air. These amazing these chemistry solutions that have come, and now we do have a plan for serving humanity. These medical devices, distribution of immunizations, or whatever kind of medical equipment you need, the sanitation and the sanitary state of that can only be achieved through careful use of chemistry. And these applications are just as important as what we do within our facilities.
Yeah, I like that. And in fact, sometimes I think, Mitch, you and I both know, when you get outside the industry and you're talking to people that aren't actively engaged, will sometimes, throw down these statements of, oh, plastics are bad or chemicals are bad. It's like, well, do you like washing your clothes? Do you like having clean clothes? Do you like having appropriate sanitization of medical equipment? How about that fine little phone that you've got that's made up of electrical components, but a whole lot of chemical components or chemically influenced components in manufacturing? And I think it's just a good reminder. I think you guys use the statistic, something like, 98% of everything is touched by the business of chemistry. Is that right?
Yes, it is, and I think it's an important thing to recognize that we are an industry that converts certain raw materials into useful other materials, and that is a critical point. And that's when I reflected on my career choice of moving into this industry, it was just that thing, because we were seeing amazing progress on how people would compensate for their kind of the energy they were using. They were getting credits for using certain types of energy sources over others, but there was no discussion like that on materials. Like how do you get credits and benefits for using a material that has a lower waste footprint or something? And so that's where we are now, and we're trying to find ways to securitize that and to show people that, hey, you can buy a product that has these ingredients in it, and it's up to you, the consumer, to make that choice. There's no government telling you what to buy, but we're seeing a diversity of interests out in the marketplace, as we always have, and chemistry is able to satisfy all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that ties into this. I think about sustainability as sustainability with a big S, as I frame it, which seemed to really kind of reach peak hype, if you will, 2020, 2021 during the pandemic. I mean, where everybody seemed to be focused on sustainability, greenhouse gas emissions. It became an everyday word. A lot of companies set aspirational goals. Of course, consumers say that they want sustainable products. They may not want to pay for sustainable products, which is its own dilemma. And yet today we're kind of in a different economic environment, a different set governments across the world in place. And some of that hype seems to have faded, and yet it's still really important. So, from your perspective, what is that shift? How do you see this evolution of sustainability from where we were, let's say 2020, to where we are today, 2025, heading into 2026?
That's a great question. I think about it a lot. You look at history, you think of the Al Gore days. There seemed to be, this almost a big movement that was about to start, and it floundered because of economic and geopolitical conditions as well. So this is not a new conversation, but I think what did happen, and I reflect on my time at the UN around this time. We had the Pope in 2015 and Mark Zuckerberg, everybody descending. It seemed like all of society was asking leaders to pay attention to these things, and we'd kind of come through a lot of the Cold War and the dividends and so on. What do we do now that we've got this future together, and looking at every country as having some work to do on improving the lives of their citizens. And so there's a lot of unstructured ambition out there, and it seemed to coalesce into this program of, especially around the climate and these things that are everybody's job but nobody's job. Everybody has a stake in it, but there's never been kind of an agreement on how to manage these externalities.
Right.
So I think there was a very interesting conversation that occurred, and I think that the costs to society and those things became very important. That we talk about the business case. You can't just suddenly flip a switch and convert all of the industry to a new fuel source or a new feedstock mix. Our members, when they invest in a big facility, they want to see it work for 40, 50 years, and they make an investment up front in doing so. Every time they make one, they take advantage of the biggest new sustainability features and the efficient heating and cooling and so on. So they always become more efficient. But I think that's the kind of the progression. I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's good. So I guess maybe the question then is, what's our current focus when as you interact with your member companies, as you interact with government agencies, et cetera, what's the current focus and conversation around sustainability?
Well, I think it's the business case conversation. It's like an efficient company, a safe facility is more profitable, and it's the primary driver of a kind of a firm is to satisfy its customers and deliver economic value. Obviously, we as a market-driven society have looked to companies to do more than that, and everybody takes a role in pushing forward societal changes in an open market system like this. Nobody, as I said, nobody has one command and control over that. What's happening now is folks are looking at affordability, looking at how can they make the most of their asset base, how can they squeeze the most profitability out of it. And it turns out that many of them are saying, wow, if I make this system just a little bit more efficient, then it'll save pennies on the ton, and that really makes a difference. So ironically, we're back to the basics. We're back to basics of what does it mean to be a sustainable business? You can stay in business, and I think not to oversimplify it, and I understand that some of the societal expectations of change might be more aggressive and dramatic than the normal business cycle would allow. But I think we have to understand that we've built the system to allow us to have these freedoms and the flexibility in the marketplace. But we have to take that as an understanding of what the design constraints are. So as the conversation, the high level conversation moves on, the actions on the ground are still happening. I mean, we have members there's a technology called carbon capture, you may have heard, where you kind of plug up the smokestack, if I can use a simple way of talking about it, and then you put that exhaust into a container, or you actually convert it into useful materials. After all, it is chemistry, and we specialize in converting unusable chemistry into usable chemistry. And so we've had members take their exhaust and turn it into products. And so this is actually now happening, and these are things that companies are doing, not because some NGOs telling them that it's a good thing to do, but because they're building a new frame of their business through that. Yeah. We also have many members who happen to have very efficient processes already. Instead of changing their processes, they're just talking about it more, and so that they can talk about their efficiencies and their lower footprints and so on. But simply because they've always done a good job of being an efficient company. So, the conversation is different. There's a concept called the hype cycle. I don't know, and on technologies, usually they talk about, a new AI, it's going to change everything. And there's a huge bubble of hype. inevitably there's a crash because it doesn't solve all those problems. But what you see if you look at historical trends, is that it does come back to about a half, what they call the plateau of productivity, which is maybe not as high as the hype, but it's much higher than the starting point. And so I think what we've seen with sustainability is we've traveled through this exuberant, kind of ambitious phase where everyone
Yeah.
was looking to see how we could push it as far as we can. And now it's hitting a little bit of the reality check. But I think that it's not that the program has failed. It's just that the ambition was a little bit too rapid for the realities of how it needs to be implemented.
Yeah, I think that's right.
The implementation is not always as breathtaking in its advances because it is a grind. Everyday decisions by people all over this country in our facilities, making small tweaks to the controls and changes to how they formulate, all adding up to a new type of chemistry.
Yeah, I like that. And in fact, your colleague, Karen Kirchnick, hosted a panel at the Chemical Summit recently and about the business case of sustainability. And that was part of that conversation with member companies around maybe moving past the hype. And we've certainly seen recently several big projects get delayed, big project announcements that were considered green or carbon neutral, carbon reduction projects. And yet what we're seeing is a lot more strategic discipline, right? So continuous improvement, where there's a real business case and where action is really achievable, right? So I think it's this step-by-step improvements as opposed to, I love that phrase of the hype cycle that you talked about, because you're right, it exists everywhere. It's like, we're going to go change the world. Well, we are going to change the world, but it's not going to be a big bang. It's going to be step-by-step in a pragmatic way.
That's right. But I compel folks to consider the huge upside in using these advances to, kind of reduce the emissions and make our customers' products more efficient as well by incorporating these efficient ingredients that we're producing. So
Absolutely.
I think, that it's not just about us, taking care of our own, which we do, and our responsible care data has shown transparently what our members have been able to do over the past decades. But it's also this impact. Invite chemistry into your innovation and your product development. We're seeing these new conversations between customers in consumer goods and packaged goods, other things, coming to the chemistry vendors saying, how can we do this in a different way? How can we change this to meet our new customer demands? And one by one, product by product, customer by customer, conversation by conversation, the reality is changing. There are new options, there are new abilities, and the industries that support us, the power, energy industry, others, they're thinking in new ways as well. So we can do a lot ourselves, but we rely on our suppliers and our customers to kind of bring us along, and we bring them along with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely a value chain, right? It's a value chain,
That's right.
not just the chemical companies, but as you say, suppliers, customers, and then down to the consumers as well, right? I think even just my own consumer experience as a consumer and having a household full of consumers. But, every time I go to an industry conference and I learn something new about the way products are used and how improvements are made, it's like, oh, well, that makes sense, right? I mean, I joked earlier about like our phones, our iPhones or Androids, whatever people have. If you think about just how much technology is harnessed in those phones and how the chemical industry and other industries have evolved and innovated to make these things work.
Indeed, yeah.
EVs, electric vehicles, require a whole new set of paints and coatings and wire coatings and things that you wouldn't think about. You're like, oh, we're just putting the parts together. No, you're putting the parts together to work in a better and different way.
That's right. And it's a time of dramatic change all over the place. And I think that we went there had been these economic concerns. Well, who's going to pay for the climate change, these products? I think pricing has become such a dynamic concern. Even for if it's a classic or legacy products and things, nobody really is certain where pricing is going on anything. So it's not as easy as it was to kind of make the case for these new formulations. But at the same time, because everything is in flux, if you can show that, hey, we're going to do this new initiative, it'll end up satisfying some of our customers who want sustainability, but we're actually going to save a lot of money if we do it this way too. So I think
Yeah,
that those,
absolutely.
and our, when we talk to customers and do surveys and things, people believe us more when we say, hey, this is, we're not doing this just because it's good, the right thing to do. It's actually good for our business. So it
Right.
is, we can make a case, and we talk to our investors and other things about this, and the member companies do.
Yeah.
And you have to find those opportunities. You have to navigate carefully through this complex environment and find those successes where the customers need them most.
Absolutely. It's all about product market fit, as
That's
they
right.
say.
Right.
Yeah. So clearly, Mitch, one of the things that you've done throughout your career is really working with a wide variety of constituents, government, non-governmental. I know that in the work that you do today with ACC, this whole area of alignment of interests across member companies, across the public sector. What have you found to be really critical in making that happen? Because I recognize certainly for ACC, there's some of the biggest companies, Fortune 50 companies, top biggest companies in the world are part of the chemical industry. And there's also a lot of small companies, mid-sized small companies. So we've got companies that have a variety of interests. How do you align those interests to get to a common platform, standard, and approach?
Our job is not to force alignment on our members. We have a very diverse industry. We do, frankly, one of the biggest customer segments of our industry is our own industry. And so even those members that are small are interacting with our larger members, and they all, want to, have the tide lift all boats, so that we can, kind of see progress, whether you're small or large. But again, it comes down to the customer. Every business, large or small, their whole job is to create a customer and to satisfy a customer. And so they need to find what it will take to satisfy the customer. Now, as I said, we've got some small companies that just happen to do chemistry in a certain way that now everyone wants to do because it's very efficient, and they happen to have this. They didn't even know they had sustainability benefits to sell, and they get to decide whether they want to market those or not. Using wood product, all kinds of things that people you talk about now as wanting in their chemistries and their products. And hey, we already do that. Let's talk about it. The larger companies have a lot at stake. They're huge operations, big crackers, big investments. Some of the other companies have less of an asset base, but they are, again, subject to the kind of the demands of those larger companies. So every company has its own stakeholders, its own fiduciary responsibility to its stakeholders and its shareholders to deliver on its own outcomes. But what we attempt to do at ACC is to help all the members see the general directionality of where things are going, and try to advocate for the interests as broadly as we can in, for example, third-party standards development. We're seeing things called the SBTI, Science-Based Targets Initiative, and other things. They're attempting as well as they can to provide frameworks for industries to report their emissions and so on. And it's our job to make sure that they're not making steps that would make it impossible for our smaller members to comply, but also that there isn't something that's just so unwieldy that whether large or small our members wouldn't be satisfied. But again, I think when we talk about going back to basics, looking at the long game, the business case for sustainability, we're not talking about taking a totally different direction on what a company does. We're talking about using the core delivery of a company, which is its products and its satisfied customers, to add on, if possible, additional benefits to society simply by reducing the waste of that process. And so I think that's a pretty straightforward way for us, large or small companies, to align to that. There are commitments that some are being asked to make, and that's at a company level. If they wish to enter into those types of commitments, that's a business strategy. We don't make that case for our members as ACC. That is not our job to commit our members to a specific path forward. We help them eliminate bottlenecks, find ways to make things more efficient. Just as we suggest they are doing in their own operations, we're helping to do in the public sector dialogue.
Yeah, love it. Love that. So I'm going to ask this question, and we can choose to keep it or not. So currently, as we record this, we're in a government shutdown, federal shutdown. How is that affecting the work that you are doing with the government elsewhere? Like it's for those of us, how about this? For me, I get my news from the Wall Street Journal and Chatter. So it's hard to see what's really happening. How does it affect an organization like ACC and its members?
Well, we'd like to see the government operating well, and our members are waiting for permits, to build the next locations for America's workforce, and those are in some cases stymied, and so we hate to see that, and we're hopeful that they can resolve these differences. I think that the bigger picture I'd like to leave, though, is this long-term thinking. We have a lot, from a multi-stakeholder approach. Of course, the federal public sector is incredibly important. There's an enormous amount of value that comes from having a highly functioning system there for innovation, new chemistries, allowing for permitting, the things that can only be done at the highest levels and will unlock the, kind of economic potential of the country. So we need to get back to that and accelerate that and do anything we can. But you mentioned the multi-stakeholder approach. We've got, state officials, municipal officials, non-governmental organizations, charities, religious groups, others. The whole of society has an opinion on where these things should go, and government shutdowns don't shut down those aspects of society. And so we owe it to our members, whether we're helping them advocate for their needs with the federal government or with any other jurisdiction or kind of a group, that work continues. So I think that's really the answer. We're 150-year-old, 160-year-old organization. We're on a long trajectory to serve the long-term needs of this country. We see the value in a highly functioning federal government, and we wish to improve the efficiency in any way we can propose. But of course, that's the business of the American people.
Yeah, and I guess we'll wait and see. Hopefully, when this is published, things will be back to normal. That's I think everyone's wish.
As you said, let's see if this question even adds to this
exactly.
This conversation. I think we don't have much to say about it, and I would rather focus on the things we can have an impact on.
Fair enough. Okay, so I've got two final questions for you. One, I think we maybe have already addressed, but we'll ask it again, which is, what's the biggest misperception that the public or regulators have about the chemical industry, and how would you like to correct that?
There are a lot of oversimplifications, about how things work in the world, and things fall into good and bad buckets, and we make these decisions. But I think it's important that folks understand and reflect on how much of a different approach our industry is taken over the decades, and a kind of a real inward focus on, what can we do to make sure that we're doing the right thing as an industry and sharing that. And that's our responsible care program. I think over the past decades, really since the turn of the century, we've been looking at being transparent, showing, what we're up to, and the kind of the how we operate, how we improve year over year in the things that folks are worried about, and the emissions and so on. It's been instructive to show folks that, but there's always a challenge in talking to folks about things they can't touch and feel and understand, the abstractions that we need. The scientists of this country, this industry, have done miracles in providing a gateway for the kind of raw materials that this earth has provided us into these highly refined solutions for health and communications and well-being. In that process, we sometimes forget how important the chemistry process is to having all those things, as you mentioned. So I think it's not a misconception as to that there's some specific fact that folks are getting wrong. It's just that how much progress we've made, how clean and safe these industries are. The facilities, I think, if you were to take folks through a chemical facility, they would be surprised to see the kind of the laboratory conditions and the hygiene and the cleanliness, because there may be a conception of something from the 1970s that they learned about in a textbook. So we've come so far as a country. I look at every industry, how far we've progressed on safety and automobiles and elsewhere. The very same progression, if not more so, because we know how important it is in our industry, has happened. And folks would be delighted to see that they can be proud of their American chemical industry. even more so than other countries, because we take our role so seriously. We audit the data coming out of our members. We really want to make sure that we're making that case very clearly. This country is a fantastic place to do industry, to build and make stuff. We have great natural resources. The emissions just by building here are lower because of our ability to use the natural gas and so on. So, we're bullish on it. And I think that, we need people to understand that for the great American comeback, as Lee Zeldin, the administrator of the EPA, says, we need to power that by going through and actually building new things and building facilities and getting back into a spirit of being makers in this country. And we're fully supportive of that. And I hope that American citizens and consumers understand how important that is to our national strength and making sure that we can deliver the solutions we need to Americans at an affordable price.
Yeah, love that. I think it's so true. And I think this aspect of just how clean and safe and well run chemical facilities are, it's impressive, right? I mean,
we're very proud
impressive.
We're very proud of the members' progress in these areas.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mitch, final question for you. I like to close with a leadership question. So you've obviously had the chance to work with great leaders. You yourself are a great leader. If you were to give advice to somebody newly entering the industry, whether being entering the chemical industry or following a path like you've followed, perhaps working in UN or the ACC or an agency that really has the opportunity to affect policies and practices more broadly, what advice would you give? What's critical to success in this space?
Well, good question. I'd reflect on it a little bit, but I think understanding the problem, understanding what problem you see as most important and seeing a route for yourself to help solve it, and really being clear about what the problem is, and I think that this is, but, it ties back to what it's sustainability, this confusing language and people, being able to debate it endlessly. That's not, you can't take action on that. When we speak to people coming into the workforce, they're like, I want to change the filtering of our air filtration because we know we can eliminate this thing if we do it just right. And they don't talk about, I want to do sustainability. They talk about, filtration that they learned about in their master's program, and that if they did it, they could change the game. And so you're looking at very detailed kind of things and not this kind of larger debate. And so I would say don't be scared by the debate about the language. There's anytime society changes and new factors become important and new performance criteria become part of the mix, there's an uncertainty about how to approach that. But I would say, focus on something that you really feel passionate about, that what the problem is and how and where to solve it, or where to contribute, because and that's, as I was attracted to this industry, it was only because every time I looked at what could an industry do to decarbonize, whether it's automobiles or consumer packaged goods, or it always came back to, well, if the chemistry was, set up, that's such a huge part of the footprint. And so it was very clear that if I wanted to have an impact, and use this kind of unique multi-stakeholder ability to bring together the solutions, the best place to do that would be in the chemistry industry, because it is, it's full of incredibly smart people solving the biggest problems of our society, kind of without any fanfare, or in some cases they have to explain away why they're solving society's problems, because folks are sometimes unclear as to why we need these chemicals. But it is. It's a job of making sure that you as an individual understand what you're trying to solve. If you can show progress against a problem, nobody can challenge you as to what language you're using.
Love it. Great. Well, this has been a great conversation, Mitch. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Yeah, it's been great. I really appreciate it. Good questions.
Absolutely. And thank you, everyone, for listening today. Keep listening, keep following, keep sharing, and we will talk with you again soon. Thanks for joining us today on The Chemical Show. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and most importantly, share it with your friends and colleagues. For more insights, visit thechemicalshow.com and connect with us on LinkedIn. You can find me at Victoria King Meyer on LinkedIn, and you can also find us at The Chemical Show Podcast. Join us next time for more conversations and strategies shaping the future of the industry. We'll see you soon.